Greetings and welcome to Flanigan's Ecologic. I am your host, Ted Flanigan, and today I've got Tim Christophersen on the podcast. He is currently the Vice President of Climate Action for Salesforce, but he's just written a fantastic book, which he sent me a copy of, called Generation Restoration. We're going to dig into the book and some of the themes in the book. Tim, I believe you're joining me from your own regenerative farm in Denmark. Is that right?
That's right. Hi, Ted. So great to be here. Yeah, we bought this farm about 5 years ago and are restoring it slowly but surely to agroforestry and permaculture.
Oh, that's great. Well, we're gonna get into that. Let's dive in. Let's dive into the book. I'm always impressed when someone comes out with a book. You got John Wiley and Sons as your publisher. Congratulations for that. And I was very impressed that you got Jane Goodall to write the preface to the book. How did that come about?
Well, I met Jane a couple of times through my work at Salesforce and setting up the Trillion Trees initiative. And Jane's always been a key champion for nature. She did write the foreword, and then sadly she passed away 2 weeks before the book was published. So this is one of the last things she published, and I'm immensely grateful to her and to the Jane Goodall Institute for supporting the book.
It really kicks off the book in a great way. And I know she talked about one of her themes. We've gone from a society that instead of a need for food and resources, turned into this greed related to use of resources. And another thing that struck me in that foreword is that when she talks about how we're certainly perhaps the most intellectual creatures on the planet, but not the most intelligent, because if we were intelligent, we certainly wouldn't be destroying this fragile planet of ours.
Well, the jury on that is still out, I would say. I think we can and we have to evolve into being a wiser and more intelligent species. And I think we're on a good path, but it's a bumpy road. As you said, the Earth definitely has enough for all of our needs, but not for all of our greed. And that is, of course, something that reflects in our relationship with nature. In a sense, we are in an abusive relationship with nature. Abusive relationships can be very one-sided. One side always takes all the time, all the energy, that's the relationship we're in with nature. It's an extractive one. And we can get back to a relationship of reciprocity. And the really good news in that is that as soon as you enter into that kind of a relationship with nature, it opens up a really rich new outlook on life. It's like finding a whole group of new friends or a long lost part of your family. It's really like a reconnecting with nature that is very powerful on an individual level for every single person. So it's a good news story in a sense, waiting to be discovered.
I like that. And it's almost like the sustainability movement that I consider myself part of. We're really talking about increasing the quality of life.
We do, and I'm also in the sustainability movement. Recently, though, I've been thinking, sustaining what are we sustaining? Are we sustaining a status quo that is getting us into more and more tenuous and fractured relationship with nature on thinner ice for climate? Or are we rebuilding something? Do we need to go beyond sustainability and become a regenerative movement and a regenerative species also? I mean, in the book, I talk about ecosystem engineers, elephants and earthworms and beavers, and humans are ecosystem engineers as well as there are other ecosystem engineers. We just happen to be the most powerful one, and we can use that power for good if we choose and if we are wise enough to recognize our role and responsibility.
One of the themes that you bring forth in the book is this notion of shifting baselines. And I wanted you to talk about that, because I found that to be such a great explanation of how we just have become accustomed, I guess, to a lower and lower, less fish in the ocean, less nature, worse air quality. Talk about shifting baselines a little bit.
So shifting baseline, in the book, I use the example of a 50-year photo series that was reaching all the way from the 1950s to the early 2000s of this charter fishing boat
Yeah.
on Keys in Florida called the Gulf Stream 2. And there are 50 years worth of photos of the fisher folk coming home with their catch of the day.
Yeah.
In 1957, there were groupers, sharks, taller than the people on board, very, very big fish. In the early 2000s, average size of the catch had shrunk by 90%. There were far fewer species. But what strikes you when you watch these pictures
Yeah.
is that the people in the pictures look equally happy. They look like they've just had a great day, which they probably did. But
yeah.
imagine that if two boats were landing and coming back to port on the same day, one with 90% more and 3 times as many species and average fish size by orders of magnitude bigger than the other one, the people on the boat with the small catch would ask for their money back and say, what are you doing? This is not, this is not what I paid for. Look at those guys over there. But because it's 50 years apart, we don't know. And that is shifting baseline syndrome. So reimagining what nature actually could look like in all its diversity and abundance is one of the most urgent tasks for generation restoration, what I call in the book, the generation alive today that has the tools and the power and the technology to rebuild nature really at planetary scale. Generation restoration, by the way, is also the hashtag for the United Nations decade on ecosystem restoration that we're in right now. We're sort of halfway through it. It's the decade 2021 to 2030. And I see a lot of hope everywhere, but we have to overcome shifting baseline syndrome. And first of all, remember how rich, abundant, diverse nature really could be, because that is nature's default. It is richness, abundance, diversity, resilience.
You don't have a lot of pictures in the book, but that really did strike me. I doubt our readers or our viewers can see this, but these pictures just struck me. I mean, and you're right. We need more images like that. I guess we have that from the redwood forests. The magnitude of the redwood trees.
Or speak with somebody who is in your family. If my kids asked me, what did you do when I was their age? I was fishing a lot for eel, European eel, in a lake near a house at the time where I grew up in the countryside. Since I was in my mid-teens till today, that population of European eel, once the most common estuary fish in Europe, has dropped by over 90% in my lifetime. So I also, if you ask around, you will hear stories like that. And how do we bring that wealth back? I think we, first of all, have to recognize that we've sort of squandered our natural heritage in a way, and then devise a plan how to get it back. And getting it back, of course, doesn't mean going back to the past. It means forward to the future and restoring nature in a way that is also more future-proof. Because with climate change, we have to recognize that ecosystems are shifting, species compositions are shifting, and we have to become these ecosystem engineers that design and build functioning ecosystems with nature as an ally. It's a huge task and opportunity. And by the way, a multi-billion-dollar business opportunity as well.
Yeah, lots of opportunity there. Yeah, your book, the description of the eel, which I had always thought of the eel as being a complete nuisance when I was a kid fishing for flounder in the New York area. The eels were all over the place and complete hassle. But that ecological cycle that they go through going across the oceans and amazing stuff. I was also struck by your description of oysters. I'm from New York. I lived in a town called Oyster Bay. We have almost no oysters in Oyster Bay anymore, and New York Harbor used to be rich with oysters. They were large oysters, right? And they were cleaning the water. And like you said, we have to restore that. And there are initiatives, which is very encouraging, right?
There are the Billion Oysters Project, for example. There are other initiatives to restore nature at that level. And you're right. New York used to be a large exporter of oysters to all over Europe. There were almost 200,000 acres of oyster beds around all the Hudson, the estuary. So New York should actually be called the Big Oyster, not the Big Apple. That would be more appropriate.
Yeah.
And when Superstorm Sandy hit New York, it would have taken a very different turn if had those oyster beds, if they'd still been there and deflected some of that storm surge. And so oysters and nature as infrastructure is also something that we're seeing a shift. I just returned from a large event in London Climate Action Week. And people are starting to talk more and more about nature as infrastructure, which I think is encouraging. It's not the whole story, but it's at least better to see nature as critical infrastructure because it can trigger infrastructural level investments, which is what we need. Nature is our most critical, but also our most basic infrastructure. And if that starts to fail, we do have a societal level problem. So investing in nature at the infrastructure level is, I think, a good first step to repair that relationship with nature.
Yeah. You mentioned the generation. The book is Generation Restoration. And I was curious about what generation you're talking about. And I think you just clarified it's the current generation, right?
So the UN actually ran a nice little theme on that on social media where they said, whether you're a boomer or Gen X like me or Gen Zero, all the different names for the generations, we're all alive today and
Right
we
now.
are all generation restoration. So this is our task. And everybody can pitch in. One of the nice things about ecosystem restoration and rebuilding nature is that everybody can be active. Sometimes when you talk about climate change, it leaves you feeling powerless because you don't know exactly where your agency is.
Yeah.
What can I do? With restoration, that's different because you can do something through the way you eat, where you shop, what you buy, what questions you ask about where your water comes from. You can, of course, restore your own garden or backyard. But even if you don't have one, you can be engaged in one of the now hundreds of thousands of restoration projects around the world. This is happening everywhere.
Are you optimistic?
We all have to be optimistic. This is
Have to be.
one thing that's quite important to me. And I borrowed this from Christiana Figueres, who's written a great book called Global Optimism. And in that, she describes these two versions of optimism. One is unconditional optimism, where you're just sitting around and you're waiting for things to get better.
Yeah.
I don't think that's very useful or realistic at this point. The other kind of optimism that's the one we need. That's called conditional optimism. And that's the optimism of a child wanting to build a tree house. I don't know if you've ever been around a kid who's so enthusiastic about something that just infect everybody with the enthusiasm and get everybody moving. So you run around, you say, get everybody to help you to build this tree house and get the right tools and get everybody to pitch in. And suddenly you're building something amazing. So that conditional optimism of saying, yeah, we can do this, but we have to work for it. That's the kind we need. And that's the kind that will get us back into a healthy relationship with nature, that will stabilize the climate, that will even out inequality, all these large interconnected mega problems of our time. They are connected, but they all require conditional optimism to fix.
Yeah, I trademarked a term earlier in my career called the power of the increment. And just this, just the inverse of the tragedy of the commons. And it kind of stemmed from in my youth, I was very involved with recycling programs. And, what's the point of recycling a can or a bottle? One might say. But as you're suggesting, it's all those incremental actions that create an amazing effect.
I love that term, power of the increment. And there's several stories around this sort of, am I making a difference? Is my part too small? I like this analogy of if you think you're too small to make a difference, have you ever spent a night with a mosquito in a room? And think of that making a difference.
Yeah.
Nobody's too small to make a difference, and it all it all adds up. And at the end of
It
the day,
does.
it is always about people who change the world. Don't wait for institutions or structures. They are there to follow through on a collective will to act, but the action and the impetus has to initially come from individual people.
I played music. I played in lots of bands when I was younger, and my guitarist, we wrote a song called EcoMotion, the name of my company, and the theme is you can't move a mountain alone, but if each of us carries a stone, you turn back and you look and you'll see that the mountain's been moved. Bump, bump. I thought, boy, that's pretty good for my buddy who's not in the environmental movement at all.
Amazing.
Bill McKibben wrote some nice comments about your book. Bill is a friend of mine, known for a long time. And he was saying you got to give nature some room to restore, but you also have to give it a nudge as well.
Yeah, that comes to the core of the book, which is that I'm really
Yeah.
saying we are part of nature. For many of us, we don't think about it much, but when people hear nature, they might think, oh, that's the national park over there that I have to drive an hour to in my car until I'm in nature. But nature is always with us. In fact, we are sort of walking ecosystems even. But we are always in nature because nature is our home on this planet. Nature provides all the different services that we need, from clean water to food to the air we breathe. So nature is always connected to us and we're always connected to nature. We've just forgotten that we are part of nature. But there
Yeah.
were some really powerful reminders recently that bring this point home again. And once we realize that we're part of nature, then this idea that we can change the course of this fragile spaceship Earth that we're on. I don't actually like the spaceship Earth analogy much because it's too mechanistic. It's a living, breathing system, but we are on this blue marble in the vastness of space, and we have to repair whatever we can do of these life support systems on the planet, and we can definitely do that. There are more and more people, I think, realizing that we're part of nature and we're part of the solution. Therefore, we're not only part of the problem.
Yeah, Bill McKibben had said that in your book, there's just example after example that give hope, right? That show what people can do and how that enhances their life. As you're talking about earlier, what is your call to action in the book?
My call to action is very simple. Everybody to become ecologically literate. So this idea of ecological literacy, just like, we've become fairly digitally literate over the past few years, everybody had to, is that once you know, for example, where your food comes from, where does your water come from, what species do I share this space with, what does nature do for my home, for my community? Once you have that understanding, we all have that understanding of nature's role in our lives, I think that will change so much in how we conserve and restore nature and how we treat nature, not as a commodity, but as part of our family.
Mm.
And that shift starts with ecological literacy, and it can start with food, like many relationships. Most of us eat 3 times a day, and through that, and being more mindful of what you eat, how you eat, it can build a very personal, very real, very beneficial and healthy and fun relationship with nature. So becoming ecologically literate sounds very academic, but it's actually more of an exploration of how your life is sustained by nature.
Now you've gone to the extent of writing this fantastic book to promote ecological literacy. How do you see that? How do you see that scaling? How do we get every family to be thinking about their food, about their role in nature, about their footprint in nature? What are the action steps that get us to this point of literacy?
I believe that while we're all individuals, we're also all connected as one humanity on some level. And there is such a thing as our collective consciousness. And I see that more and more when you speak with people, that we all know that there's something fundamentally wrong in how we treat the planet. Even people who benefit from that destruction or think they benefit from the extractive mindset. And that, I believe, that social tipping point of realizing that we need to shift something and change something, but just not knowing what that is, will help us scale. There are many books on this topic now.
Yeah.
Mine is just one of them, but there are also many podcasts, many projects. There's a resurgence of regenerative agriculture around the world, young people moving back into working with the land, working with the soil. There's a huge shift in the understanding of how important soil biodiversity is. And if you 10 years ago had talked about anybody about soil biodiversity, they would not have known
Right.
the term. But the fact that our plants and our food are actually grown by the microbes in the soil, not by the soil itself or by the chemicals we put there, that is a mind shift in the understanding of something as fundamental as where our food comes from. So things are happening, and there is a collective growing awareness.
Yeah.
I think my book will be one contribution to this. I've worked on this now for 25 years, so the book also contains 25 years of successes and failures in this space. We've tried many things, some didn't work.
Yeah.
But overall, I'm optimistic that we're on an accelerating solutions curve now. We're on a very positive trajectory. It might not look like it always, but I think that collective social tipping point and awareness is there if we push for it. And remember, not everybody has to agree with everything. It's enough if there's a vocal and well informed growing group of people that has this new awareness, and that will spread.
And I suppose maybe the silver lining of climate change is that it's in our face, right? And a lot of the naysayers are being now impacted by it, and that may push us towards that social tipping point, right?
I was in London last week, and there was a heat wave, and this is of course very ironic, but I was invited to an event at Climate Action Week to talk about adaptation to extreme heat in urban areas, and the event was canceled because of extreme heat.
Right.
Seriously, because London is not adapted to.
Yeah.
They don't. Building didn't have climate, didn't have air conditioning, and people couldn't get into town. The public transport system broke down, schools were closed. Nobody can say we didn't tell them about this, because I've been telling people about this for 25 years, and you maybe in a similar amount of time. But what this means is now people are paying more attention from a supply chain perspective. For example, in the private sector, supply chains are very fragile now because of these disruptions of wildfires, extreme weather. So suddenly doing climate action is not some fringe stuff.
Right.
It is the core of your business resilience. If your business is at stake, you invest in making it more stable.
Yeah.
So we might not even call it climate action then, but investing in, for example, regenerative agriculture is starting to look like really good business sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell me about you for a few minutes. Grew up in Germany. Is it Schleswig? Am I pronouncing that
close to the Danish border. That's right.
Close to the Danish border. Went to school in Dresden. And then you worked in Africa for many years. Talk a little bit about that, what you learned in that experience.
Yes, I worked for the United Nations Environment Program for 15 years, first in Montreal in Canada for the Convention on Biodiversity, and then 10 years at the headquarters of UNEP in Nairobi. And living there with my family, I love Africa and I love Kenya. It's one of the most beautiful places to live. And one of the great privileges we had was to experience nature on safaris a lot. And I remember, and this was in Amboseli National Park a few years ago, there was a major drought. And there was this group of maybe a herd of 100 elephants shuffling around in the bone dry soil, great clouds of dust.
Yeah.
And the The great story behind it is that if in the past these great herds of elephants would have known where to go to avoid that drought and meander along, migrate along corridors to more water-rich areas. But that knowledge in the matriarchs with the elephants, that is now lost because all these areas are fenced. So in a way, we also share this with other species, that we have lost some ecological literacy, and rebuilding that and helping nature to become a living, functioning system again is part of our ecosystem engineering challenge. We are ecosystem engineers who can and have to help nature. And I hear this a lot, that nature doesn't need our help or nature will be fine without us. I don't buy that. I think we are part of nature, and nature needs our help right now. For millennia, nature has nurtured us, as Jane writes in her foreword, and now she needs our help.
Absolutely. And your role in Africa was to do what with UNEP?
I was responsible for the links between nature and climate change at the UN Environment Program. So my team ran a large global program to conserve tropical forests. My latest job was to set up the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. And we started a nature and climate finance team, which channels public and private finance to nature conservation, started a report series to measure how much money is going into nature. So we were doing a lot of things that only the UN can do. And I have a lot of respect for my colleagues at the UN. But then 4 years ago, I was approached by this company called Salesforce, because they were starting a Trillion Trees initiative and were asking me to advise them on setting that up and who to work with. And at some point they asked me if I wanted to join them. So I've been with Salesforce now these past 4 years.
Yeah, and the impact there must just be huge. I mean, they've got a couple 100,000 clients all over the world.
Yeah, what I love about Salesforce is it's a very values-driven company. Sustainability is a core value. And yeah, as you say, over 50,000 NGOs, but hundreds of thousands of companies, including most of the Fortune 500 companies, have a trust relationship with us. So when I speak with their sustainability teams about nature or water as a new key issue for us, I really get to advise and hopefully sometimes guide them into investing more in nature, doing more for nature, taking collective action. That's a really rewarding situation. But we need everybody. We need the public sector, we need the UN, we need governments, we need the private sector. Everybody needs to be a leader now, and everybody can do their part. And given that Salesforce is a technology company, of course, the power of technology is also very helpful can be very helpful in all of this.
And you said was it about 5 years ago that you moved to Denmark, and you now have your own regenerative farm in Denmark. Talk about that.
That's where I'm calling from today. We made some hay yesterday, and it was really nice to bring in your own hay. We are mostly growing trees, to be honest. Because we don't have a full-time team here on the farm. It's just our family. But we plant about 30,000 trees on one of our fields. We're doing a large fruit orchard. We have sheep. We do rotational grazing. There's this method called AMP grazing, adaptive multi-paddock grazing, where you use livestock to restore soil biodiversity and soil organic carbon and water retention capacity. So it is a great project, and it gives the sort of reality check to everything that I do and talk about and try to do in my day job. Very grateful to my wife and my family for helping with this project.
Yeah, I often ask our guests at the end of our interviews, how do you maintain balance in your life? And it sounds like you've really got it. You've got your intellectual side. You've written this great book. You're working for Salesforce. You're out there lecturing and influencing people, and then you've got your hands-on. You got your hands-on work right there.
Well, I wish I could
farm.
spend more time with that, because obviously I don't have a lot of time, but the time I have, I really like to spend working with nature and working the soil, working on the farm. It's very rewarding, but it's harder than it sounds. I have so much respect for anybody who's a farmer because it's so unpredictable, complex, hard work. So I think we should all hold farmers in very high esteem. They are the guardians of these landscapes that we need to restore. So we have to have farmers on our side.
How old are the kids? Your kids?
14 and 18.
Yeah, so they're getting a great education. What a great role model you are, Tim.
Well, thank you so much, Ted. And it's a great pleasure to be connected. I know you've had over 200 episodes now. Such an honor to be here and to be with somebody who was there very early and when the podcast wave wasn't even started yet. So you're a pioneer in many respects.
Well, thanks for saying so. Thanks for being on the podcast. It's been great talking to you. That's it. Thanks for listening to Flanigan's Ecologic. We'll see you next time.